Hey, y'all, quit yelling in there, please.
All right, you primitive screwheads, listen up.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Here's Johnny.
Vanity. Definitely my favorite sin.
I am the devil, and I am here to do the devil's work.
The power of Christ compels you!
This is my boomstick.
What's your favorite scary movie?
Hello, horror heads, and welcome to Shiver, a horror movie podcast. We are your hosts. I'm Daniel DeBona.
And I'm David Ulloa.
And we are joined this week as we continue to, it's August. It's still summer, so we're still calling it Summer Fan Fest. And we are joined this week by none other than Michael Hunger, here from Tuscaloosa with me. Hunger, how are you, man?
Doing great, Daniel. Thanks you all for having me.
Yeah, dude. So what we've been doing with Summer Fan Fest is we've been letting the people pick the movies, and then the person who picks it comes on the episode and does that movie with us. So Hunger, you have chosen Session 9, and
yes,
a hidden 2001 gem. What made you pick this one?
So I think I watched it for the first time probably around 2012. So I was already behind the 8 ball at that point. And a good friend of mine, Devin, we used to hang out. We did this thing called Man Days. And it always started because he would drop his girlfriend off at night, pick me up, and then we'd basically drink all day Sunday. And it always started with watching a horror movie. So just like random stuff we'd come across, and we found it on Netflix and just seemed interesting enough. So we're like, yeah, why not? Just kill a couple hours at the very least. And I loved it from the moment it ended. Was like, oh, I can't wait to watch this again.
This movie is one that I remember when Netflix first introduced streaming, and I was watching it through my Xbox, and this was one of back when that streaming catalog was rough. And that was the first time that I saw this one because Netflix went out and got their hands on tons and tons of B and C horror movies and used those for their original streaming library. And that's where I saw this one for the first time. Honestly, the first time I ever heard anybody talk about this movie, other than when I saw it back in 2005, was one time Hunger and I were having a conversation at the bar. Our buddy, friend of the show, Josh Schneider, a big horror guy too. And so we would sit around and occasionally talk horror movies, and Hunger mentioned this, and I was like, oh my God, I'm not the only person who's seen Session 9. So we are doing Session 9. Dave, was this your first time seeing this one?
I hadn't even heard of this movie, believe it or not, until Hunger came in and was like, hey guys, this is what I want to do. And I was like, okay, cool. So it was kind of interesting because I spoke to Andy Chacon, who's longtime listener, fan, friend, and occasional guest on the show. He was like, oh, that's that movie with David Caruso. And I was like, oh, I didn't even know David Caruso was in this. And so then I started to get excited because as a fan of both NYPD Blue and CSI Miami, me being a Miami boy, I was like, okay, well, it's got to be at least so bad it's good.
It's got to be at least CSI Miami levels, right?
Right.
But before we get too into this, so Hunger, we were talking off air, and Hunger and I met when we were in the service industry in Tuscaloosa here, and we would hang out about once a week at trivia nights. And I know that you're a big movie guy, Hunger, but you're hit and miss with horror, right?
Yeah, I like horror, but it's not something that I really go out of my way to look for.
Right. So one thing that we usually like to ask people is when you go back in your history, what's the first horror movie you remember affecting you? Normally it'd be what got you pulled into this? Because we're all just crazy about it. But since it's just hit and miss with you, what's the first one you remember?
I think I was probably about 7 or 8 years old. We're at a friend's house because, mom's still at work, we're off school. and we're hanging out, and her dad put The Evil Dead on TV.
There we go.
That's one hell of an
So
introduction.
Yeah, I don't think I slept for about 3 days after the whole pencil and the card picking scene. That
God. Oh man, that one's so good. And if you're new to the show and you missed it, we've done Evil Dead before, so you can head over to Spotify or iTunes and check that one out. But today we are doing session 9, released in 2001, and for an early 2000s movie, this one was really different than a lot of the stuff that was coming out at the time. So watching it now, which one thing I kept thinking about this movie is I was like, God, this feels so dated to be released recently. Then I was like, oh my God, 2001 was 21 years ago. So, I always hate when then you start doing math and you're like, God, that's like if I watched the movie released in 79 in the year 2000, and math are not our friend. So at 21 years old, it's definitely, it's different than anything that's coming out now, and it's different than things were in the 2000s. So the first question is, how effective is it at scaring? Like, what did you think of the movie? How did it work? Parts, whole, kind of just, what did you think of it? We'll start with you, Hunger. This is your movie.
I think, because I've always preferred the movies that are more like bone chilling, like you almost leave and you're still looking over your shoulder for the next 30, 40 minutes, that give you that kind of creepy feeling over anything violent or gory or anything like that. And I think there's a lot to do with the way it's put together, as far as using like background noise, the kind of stingers that happen, like the little screaming that all of a sudden pop up.
Yeah.
To where it's jump scare-esque, but it's not jump scares at the same time. Kind of like, like with the shadowing and the lights, it gives you that whole, oh, there's something in these shadows that's coming up, but there's never really anything there, for the most part, at least.
Yeah. What about you, Dave? What'd you think about this one?
So it's really weird, because I think this movie is an instance where it is lesser than the sum of its parts. Because taken individually, there's a lot to like about this movie. Like, I got like 70s giallo from this a lot. You've got this mystery about who is it that's actually going around killing these people, whether or not it was actually a surprise who it was, because I don't think there was very much surprise in it, but it could have been someone else, right? There were little hints here and there, right? And certainly the way that the kills happened, despite the fact that we don't actually see them, which I think is to the movie's detriment. That was very giallo. The way that you see from the killer's point of view, coming right up to the victim, and I do think it was creepy. Like, it was very atmospheric, and it crawled under my skin. But I don't think it was a good movie.
Fair.
And I don't know if that makes any sense, because I just listed off a ton of like really positive things.
Yeah, like you compared it to giallo films and then said,
and I am well documented here on Shiver as a giallo fanatic. I actually think, despite the fact that David Caruso's in this movie, the acting's pretty good. Actually, I think and it just, for some reason, none of it gels to bring together a movie that I enjoyed, which is really weird, because sometimes you find movies where it's like, okay, well, that was bad and that was bad and this other thing was bad, but you know what, I want to watch this again.
No,
that did not happen here.
The phrase that I kept falling back on as I watched this movie is for me, it's lovably naive, right? Like this movie seems to have an idea of what it wants to be, and it ventures into some other things. I do think that creepy is a better word than scary for this one. That word, I think you've both said the word atmospheric. I mean, that's some of the audio in this movie, I think, is what really sets it apart from some other things. There's some, in a good way, there are some things that set it apart when we get to like filmmaking. But as I watch this movie, and like I said, it's probably been like 17 years since I've seen this, and so I couldn't really remember. Like I thought and I remember bits and pieces. I remembered a couple of things here and there. I didn't remember enough of it to where I was just like I didn't have to pay attention. I did find that this movie was one where I had to pay really good attention. Like a buddy, a buddy of mine was had just got around to watching SummerSlam last night, and I watched it Saturday when it happened. So he's like frantically texting me all during him watching SummerSlam, and I was eventually like, dude, I will catch up on all of these, but every time I look down, I feel like I'm missing something in this movie, right? Like a lot of stuff is happening for a movie where not a lot happens, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Right. Like there's like a lot of moving pieces, but not a lot happens, like overarching.
Yeah.
And that I think is to the movie's detriment. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't like it. I liked that it felt I don't even know, bold is probably the wrong word, but we talk a lot about how when somebody when one of these movies is made and somebody kind of gives us like this uncompromised idea of the movie that they had. And I think that what we got here was somebody who had like this really good idea for, I mean, kind of, it was like I mean, this is the same guy who made the Machinist, right? But like, you watch this,
Could
and
have
it's
fooled
like,
me.
yeah, and it's like, man, this kind of feels like a film school movie.
And
except for the fact that you got David Caruso.
I was thinking about that this whole time. Like, if this would have been a student film, maybe 30 or 45 minutes long, and you've got the same budget to work with, right?
Yeah.
That could have been something really interesting. I felt like maybe it was just not enough to fill up an hour and 42 minutes.
Yeah, I do think it was a little bit long, but there were a couple moments. There is one freakishly standout moment from this movie that's scary, and it's the first like do it moment where he's kind of having the weird flashbacks because he falls asleep in his truck and he wakes up, or not to wake up, he like dreams and he sees himself covered in the blood and it's like full of his mask, and that shit's nightmare fuel, right? Like the one shot of the chair down the hallway. There are some genuinely really scary moments in this. There's some really cool creepy stuff. But then there's some of this stuff that's so cartoonish, but not on purpose, right? Like when we watch Child's Play, there's a lot of cartoony stuff, but it's about a child's toy that kills people. So cartoony makes sense. There were some moments here that I think that Brad Robertson thought carried a lot more, or Brad Anderson thought carried more weight than they did. And I think that's where the movie falters some, but man, I had a good time watching it last night. So, I mean, it's got some scare, it's got some creep, it's got some, but like it's like I said, I just kept falling back. Like the phrase popped in my head. It was just lovingly naive. It knew what it wanted to be. It knew what it wanted to do, and it just kind of assumed that we were going to overlook. I feel like it's just the movie itself. The creators just kind of assumed we were going to overlook some of these flaws because they had this really grand idea of the movie that they wanted to make. And that played out sometimes and it didn't some others.
Or maybe it's the sort of thing where they were standing so far back to really observe this, grand masterpiece, and then didn't really look and see, well, you know what, the brushstrokes here are not, or maybe they're laid on a little thick, or maybe it's not laid on thick enough. And when you stand apart, you're like, oh, okay, I see what you did there. But then when you come up close, you're like, oh my, this is not a Monet.
Yeah, that's what I was actually thinking to myself, because it's been a couple years since I watched it, and I rewatched it a couple hours ago to remind myself. And even as much as I love the movie, there were some things where I guess rose-colored glasses is the best way to put it, because I'm sitting there and like, I do not remember David Caruso being this hammy.
Oh, I mean, he was just being David Caruso, man. Like
Yeah.
this is,
I thought he was pretty toned down for David Caruso.
Well, I guess it wasn't an overall, but there were some moments.
Oh my god, there
like
was
especially the one towards the end, and when they're kind of piecing things together.
Please say the same one I'm thinking about.
Hey,
Yeah,
you.
yes, God, yes.
I think it's the combination of the way he says it, and then that little camera twist of like you said, with thinking they're putting too much weight on it, where he's like, "Oh man, this is going to be such a great important moment," and it was just, it was
laughable.
Yeah. Oh my god, that moment! Like, but at the same time, like, it was almost. So there's always that thing, and I don't know if it's an actual saying, like a known saying, or if it's just something that people say, which I guess is just a saying. But there's there's a very fine line between just homage and just petty like imitation. And I feel like that exact moment, like I feel like when they filmed it, they were like, "Oh my god, the Hammer horror fans are gonna cream about this, right?" And they film it, and yeah, they're looking at it, they're like, "Oh, nailed it. That was Caruso at his best. That was camera work at its best. This is it right here." And then you actually watch it in context, you're like, "Whoa!"
I can imagine that line and the camera movement and all that working really well with someone like a Nicolas Cage. Someone that where we buy into the absurdity of his acting, but David Caruso's never been that guy.
Yeah,
we're always laughing at David Caruso, not with David Caruso, and I think that definitely happened there.
Yeah, God. As soon as you were like, "There's this one moment towards the end," I was like, "Oh yes, he's gonna mention it now." Good, let's talk about that, because that scene, man, it's one of those ones that like I was so engaged, like to see how far they were gonna go with like that like Hammer style of cheese. But then when it was just that one thing, I was like, now I'm kind of sucked out. Like if you had just committed at that point for the rest of the movie to this, all right, let's go.
So one of the areas where I think this movie thinks it shines is its story. All right. So there's a fairly complex story, right? It's two-sided, right? We've got what's going on with the hazmat crew inside the asylum, and then we've got the story of what's going on, the session tapes.
Right.
So, I guess my question is the story itself scary or creepy or, any of the other adjectives that we've used to describe it? But also, is it a compelling story? Does it manage to do both these things at the same time? And I guess, Daniel, we'll go with you.
So, like, I'm always torn when it comes to a movie that is using DID, dissociative identity disorder, as a plot device. I always feel like it's a really slippery slope that can be done very well. I just the movie's old. Identity, right? Like Identity uses DID very effectively because you don't know that's what you're dealing with.
We talked about Malignant not that long ago, and we kind of agreed that was a fairly interesting use of DID.
But while these session tapes were done in a very creepy way, and that was all audio, and that was so good. I loved him listening to the tapes, and I loved him like. It was funny because 20 years later now, like that dude would essentially be like every like middle-aged housewife who's got to rush home to watch the newest Ted Bundy documentary, right? Like his life was consumed with getting to the next part of this story, and so that I really liked that. But the other side of that coin is when you're only using that creep factor as kind of a deus ex for explaining something. And they did a good job with it. I will say that. but I'm always wary of DID as a story idea. But I think that what they gave us here was pretty good. I think that it kind of meandered at times, and I think that there were times when they wanted us to think one thing was happening and it wasn't. But they were trying to keep us guessing, even though the clues didn't quite add up. That being said, it's not, we're always going to go back to this one. It's not on that high tension level of not making sense, right?
No. It's definitely not high tension.
Right. Like the points connect here. But I think that the tapes were really creepy. I think that kind of the systematic like disassembling of Gordon was very well told. Hank, I think, was Josh Lucas, man. I mean, it's just Josh Lucas, right? He's always going to be the same guy. Sweet Home Alabama, Session 9, right? It's all the same. But they did a good job with it. But what's odd is that phrase that you used in the beginning, which is somehow the whole of this movie isn't as good, isn't as good as the sum of its parts. Because I look at these things and I look at some of these good performances, and I look at the fact that those tapes were so creepy. I look at the fact that they didn't oversell Gordon with the DID. I think it tells well. I think it just tells very choppy, and I think that they didn't need an hour 40 to do it. I think that if you could have tightened this movie up, there's probably easily 10-15 minutes of dick grabbing while eating lunch that could have got left on the floor, right? And you still got the good movie, but now it's tighter. And so there's definitely some good parts to this story. I don't know. There was something about the way that it portrayed that didn't add up to what it felt like it maybe should. What do you think, Hunger?
I agree. That is my biggest, when I sat down to do my notes on everything, that's my biggest issue, I guess, with it, is the story, like you've both touched on, the length there's too much to it. They do a good job of jumping in with backstory of, there's all this competition in the hazmat industry, apparently. Gordon's family life. Just kind of
the cutthroat world of asbestos removal.
Yeah, and then Gordon's family, he's not sleeping. His baby has been sick. Phil and Hank hate each other because Hank stole Phil's girlfriend, all that. They touch on it very quickly, get it out of the way. But then the issue is they keep coming back to touch on it again.
Yeah, they dwell on it.
Paul Guilfoyle's character, I guess he's like the city manager or whatever he is, when he covers all that with Gordon, and then they come back and Phil has almost the exact same beat for beat conversation with him about his family life, where you guys work together constantly. You spend weeks and weeks on end cleaning out asbestos, nobody else to talk to but each other, but you're still coming. Oh, your baby's still sick. Oh, you're still not sleeping. Okay, we get it. He's not sleeping. Hank hates Phil, or Phil hates Hank. Whatever. We get it. You don't need to add another 20 minutes to the movie covering this stuff.
Yeah.
But it does kind of, it adds to the tension, I think, a little bit, that kind of slippery slope, but it was excessive for that kind of, these guys building on things that have happened. They just feel the need to keep mentioning why this tension is building up.
I think you guys have nailed pretty much why I feel the way that I feel. There's also something that really bugged me about this. And maybe it's because I'm reading too much into a movie that shouldn't be read that much into. But I also feel like this movie takes itself very seriously.
Yeah.
And so a movie that takes itself seriously kind of begs to be taken seriously. So I got this whole the fall of the House of Usher feel, in that the tapes represented what was going on inside the asylum, right? And I don't think anyone would argue that, except that the physical state of the asylum improves as these tapes are going on. So what we're actually talking about is the mental state of Gordon, right? But here's the thing. There's no indication that Gordon is suffering from DID, except that at the very end, Simon says something that maybe he can jump into people, so maybe it's not DID. Then we're talking about possession.
Yeah.
Right. So in that case, is this something more along the lines of The Shining?
Yes.
Where the the spirit of this thing, it stayed in the asylum. And at that point, I start thinking, what the fuck is this movie even really about? And what was the point in watching it?
You are not alone in reading into that, because as he goes through the session tapes and he's talking to Princess and Bobby, right, are the alters, and Billy, yeah, Princess and Billy, and it's like, okay, well, Princess is in the mouth because she talks and she's sweet, and Billy's in the eyes because he sees everything, and then we finally get that very last scene. I think when I was just like, wait, what? Was when Simon is like, yeah, I hide in the week and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, wait, so like different people? And I did that same thing. I was like, so Simon's like, yeah. So then you have that moment where you're like, so wait, is Simon a presence or an altar? Right. And yeah, because then when you make that comment about dwelling within the week, it's like, okay, so it's like a demon possession movie where somebody has to be broken to allow it in. And then, yeah, so then you just get that one last thing at the end that you could very easily just chalk up. But then when you read into it, like apparently at least the two of us did, it's like, wait, so what is Simon then? And then you get this. And then, yeah, you get this whole other thing. And then the credits roll and you're like, okay.
Right. Yeah. So although I don't think that this is on the same level as High Tension. We always go back to High Tension
it will forever.
Like,
one day we're actually just going to have to do High Tension. Like we're just going to have to actually do an episode about High Tension.
So we actually did High Tension on episode 4. And
that's right.
You know what was really interesting is my wife was the guest on that episode, and we had both taken a class in college called Horror in Literature, and it was the best class I ever fucking took, right? And the professor was like, "Oh, it's so fucking awesome. We're gonna watch this movie, High Tension." It had just come out, right? It's like Alexander Age is doing amazing things in France. Americans can learn something from him. And we watched it, and we were fucking like, "Oh my god, this is amazing," right? But also like you're smoking a fuck ton of weed in college, so it's like, "Oh yeah, this is awesome," right? So I hadn't seen it since, and then I watched it for that episode. And I was like, I turned to my wife. I'm like, now we got to talk about this shit because it doesn't make sense. So, and I don't think it's on quite that level.
Right.
There's no, gap in the plot. There's no plot hole so big that I think the movie doesn't work. I just think that the movie doesn't work for me because when I start looking at what is actually being said here, what is this all about, when I have to start making jumps in logic that aren't present in the movie, that aren't substantiated by anything in the movie, where I'm just like, okay, well, maybe this might mean this other thing, right? Not like in Hereditary or Midsommar, like we talked about on those episodes, where it's like, okay, here's a hint of something that you can then figure out for yourself, right? There's no hinting here. It's like, okay, how can I rationalize this for this to make sense? And as someone who is always preoccupied with story, this is always like, it's the movies time and time again, the movies that falter in the story department, these are the ones that I end up giving low scores to, because if they've taken themselves seriously, right? It's not, something joking like the last Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah, movie. That's the one I was going to reference.
The movie's a fucking mess, but it also knows that it's a mess, and it's not to be taken seriously. This is something totally different. I felt like this was treating itself like a case study, where it was like, you know what? The same way that people watch My Cousin Vinny in law school, they're like, look at how accurate this is to an actual court case, right? In fucking psych departments, all over the country, university professors are going to be saying, look at how dissociative identity disorder is portrayed here, because they fucking nailed it, and they fucking didn't.
Yeah, and like we said, it's just it's odd because, like I said, and just that word I keep coming back to is naive, because it's, sometimes we talk about we when we talk about people making a movie and like this ability to storyboard things, right? It's like they had some of these scenes that they really wanted to do, and those scenes were really effective, and they knew that there was going to be this underlying story of the session tapes, and that was really effective. They had some great shots in mind. It was just like I always this one's not even horror, but like the Ender's Game movie, right? For all the problems with that author. Oh, Ender's Game is one of my favorite books of all time. And when they made that movie, they gave us all like the great scenes from the book, but they left out all the connective tissue,
the meat.
Yeah, and that's kind of what they got. I think that when we got the scenes that were breathtaking or really scary, I think that was the outline that they had. And then when they were filling the gaps is when it faltered. So you didn't stay engaged long enough to get from scene to scene. I mean, one thing about the story is you're a solid, I think I marked it at 48 minutes in before the first like good scare, right? Like you get some creepy stuff, but like the first like good scare, I mean, 45 minutes in, that's
You've got less than an hour left.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of good pieces of a story here, which is something that that I think we're just we're just gonna keep falling back on. And I do think that, man, when they give us now, one thing that I will not take away from this story, they do such a good job of hinting around how severe the incident between Gordon and his wife was.
That was well developed.
That in the end, when he's talking on the broken phone, and then we get the flashback, and granted it's all just audio, but we get the flashback of what happened. It's like, whoa, like that was brutal. And that was very effective storytelling in a less is more way. And that scene, I think, was incredibly well done and was a good kind of end cap to those things. And to realize, and again, something that did kind of hint at, because at one point he's like, we didn't talk to Hank's girl. You talked to Hank's girl. Like, we don't know who's on the phone. And then you're like, then when that happens, you're like, oh yeah, we never actually heard her say anything, right? Like,
and we know the Caruso's got like a hatchet to bury with this guy,
right?
So that's why I say like there was a hint of giallo there, where it's like, who actually is the one going around doing all this stuff? Is it Caruso? Is it was it Hank? Right?
Hank, Hank, Josh Lucas.
No, Paul, right? That was his name.
Oh, wait, you're talking about Mike?
Caruso's
Mike
character. Mike.
Oh, Caruso was Phil. Mike was the law student. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. I just pulled it up here. Yeah. So, was it Phil or is it Gordon? Right. I never really thought it might be anyone else. Maybe Mike, because he's falling into the, the rabbit hole of these tapes.
Right.
And he talks about the lobotomy with the, listen, the moment you see that boiling pot of water in the very first scene with Gordon coming back home, you already know something's going to happen.
Right.
So something's happened, because I looked at it and I said it in the same way that you say it every single time to Bona. Like, you show me a gun in Act 1, you better use it by Act 5. And sure enough, they fucking did. So I wasn't surprised by the fact that he killed his wife and his daughter. So but I do think that the way that was developed was good. Even if there wasn't a surprise there.
Yeah, there was, like I said, it was just I don't know. Like I said, I think that it was the connective stuff. I think that the scenes that they envisioned when they had this movie, and that's where that word naive comes in.
Mhm.
Like they had a couple of great scenes in mind and were like, we can make a movie with this. And that's where the naivete comes in, right? Because it's like, but one thing about this movie is that we've got a good number of actors here that we know, so much so that we just keep referring to them by their real names,
Yeah.
but not a ton of actors, right? I mean, we've basically got the four guys on the job and Paul Guilfoyle, right? Like that's the cast of this movie. So when
The
you look
CSI
at
crossover we
the
never
C-
wanted.
and so when you look at this movie and you're looking when we want to look at the characters, how well does this cast work at becoming these characters that they were portraying on screen? Like, did it feel genuine? Like, did you forget that it was Caruso and Lucas and just buy into these characters? Go to you first, Hunger.
I would say, I know because anytime I watch a movie, first thing I do when it's done, I go to IMDb and I check the trivia.
Constantly.
So, as far as I know, the only character that was written for an actor was the nephew Jeff, which I believe is Brennan Sexton III.
Yep.
Apparently, Anderson had him in mind when he was writing that character, and obviously I don't know Brendan Sexton III personally, but good Lord, if he is actually that character in real life, I can only imagine what it's like to hang out with him, because that kid drove me nuts.
And what's bizarre is that dude's IMDb is like full of movies that I don't remember him being in, right? Like his IMDb is like,
I didn't
he
look
was
him
in
up.
Black Hawk Down and Empire
Was
Records
he?
and
What?
Pecker. And I'm like, what? I have seen all of those movies. And oh yeah, Boys Don't Cry. That was the other one. I was like, I don't remember this guy in these movies.
Yeah, but on the whole, it seemed like everybody was well in the role that they played, to the sense that, yeah, they fit the characters well, but also, like you said, we've been referring to everybody by their real names, because even watching it, I'm like, oh yeah, that's Josh Lucas being Josh Lucas.
Yeah, exactly.
He's got great facial hair, but it's just Josh Lucas being Josh Lucas, and David Caruso being David Caruso. Peter Mullen, I think he does a very good job of displaying emotion in just his face. Couple that stick out to me is kind of that when he goes back to Mary Hobbs' room and sees all of his own personal photos in that collage that's on the wall.
Right.
And just that kind of, he's finally piecing it together for himself.
Mm-hmm.
The look on his face stands out to me. And then a couple other times, it's just like the way he looks at people, or even just reacts emotionally. Like when I think he's pouring hydrogen peroxide on the burn on his leg in his truck the one night. He just does a very good job of portraying that.
It was the saliva, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that always sells
just crying into the night and drooling on himself. But the one that stands out to me, ironically not Caruso, it's other CSI, Paul Guilfoyle, because his character behaves so ridiculously, like the bat wing when he keeps motioning while he's describing the layout of his building. And I think when they were filming that scene, he did like a normal speaking voice, and then was like, oh, Peter Mullen has an Irish accent, I'm also going to do an accent, and slipped into just the worst fucking Boston impression I've ever heard in my entire life. Like, Pocky Cot, Harvard Yard, all of a sudden slipped into his sentences. And I was like, oh, okay, just give him the job so we can move on.
Dave?
So here's the thing. These characters are not terribly complex. In fact, I would argue that they're more caricatures than characters. However, I think that what we have is fairly fleshed out, and that comes at the movie's detriment because the movie kind of screeches to a halt on a number of occasions where we just have all of this dialogue and all of this exposition that we don't fucking care about.
Right.
So they're really well defined caricatures, and I think that what we have is a fairly good job by these actors playing these very, very two-dimensional characters. They've done what they can with the part, right? Anderson was clearly more concerned, like we said, like with the big picture. It's like, yeah, but what you don't understand is that this thing's gonna fuck, right? And it didn't, right? He's like, no, don't worry about what the character's motivations are, right? He's really smart, and he went to and he went to law school, but he didn't make it because he didn't want to. But he's really smart, right? He didn't make it because he wasn't good enough. It was because he didn't want to, because he obviously wants to be, shucking asbestos. Don't
Somebody's
fucking
gonna do
ask
it, right?
why that's written in there. Just fucking give me that, right? Because big picture, this thing's gonna be fucking awesome,
Exactly. Right.
And so, like, none of the characters make any fucking sense. Right, none of them behave the way that like real people behave, but within the truth of the scene, the truth of the movie, I think they give us performances that work. It's one of the only things that kept me interested. The fact that I knew David Caruso, even though he wasn't wearing any glasses, that he was going to take off and give us a killer one-liner. He was going to chew up a little bit of scenery there, and it was going to be cool, right?
Right.
And then we still got like some subdued Caruso every now and then. So it was like he kept you on your feet, right? On your toes. It was weird, but I think it worked. As far as the acting goes, it was as genuine as I think anyone could be with what they were given.
Yeah, I think that's hitting the nail on the head. I think that you got some actors here who were given like a bare bone structure kind of what this character was, and then they just they took it and ran with it, and it went pretty well. Like I did really like the Phil, not Phil, Mike, the lawyer guy. Like I said, I was fascinated by like his, I got to go check the breakers and then like go listen to tapes, right? Like and it was never like mentioned as like a plot device that he became so obsessed. He never told anybody, it's not like he was frantically tearing these things apart. Like he had to get to the next one, but we could tell how invested he was in.
But there was never
story.
any indication that he had this like obsessive personality,
right?
Where he would like ignore his job, where he knew he would get a $10,000 bonus if they finished on time, and like purposefully have them fall behind on work.
Yeah, and so, but I liked that. I did, like we said. I mean, it's just, Josh Lucas is just always Josh Lucas, right? I mean, that's what we're always going to go back to on him. But he did exactly what he had to do, right? He was the semi-lovable asshole, like, and like there's that one scene where he's like, no, like I still just bang Amy to get it filled, right? Like that was like, it's like, wait, what? Like you're seriously still with this chick just because it bothers your coworker? Like little stuff like that. And it's like, yeah, okay, sure. Like, you know what? I buy that based on this character that I'm seeing here. It was funny. My kids and I just finished watching all 8 Harry Potter films. So it was like when Peter Mullen showed up, I was like, oh, look, it's the Death Eater, right? Like, because we literally just finished Deathly Hallows, the second one. I think it was a Sunday or Monday. Like we just wrapped it up. And so like I recognized all these, a majority of these people. I enjoyed what they brought to the role because, like you said, David Caruso. honestly, like the summation of David Caruso's career is going to be CSI Miami, right? Like that's going to be what everybody always remembers. And everything he always does is always going to be nitpicked and compared to that, partially because that's just his acting ability and style. And it's just CSI Miami, it was just ran wild. But, that's what we got here. They did a good job with it. I did really enjoy it. And like I said, though, I think that kind of the dismantling of Gordon was told very, very well. And Hunger, I agree with you completely. A lot of it was told non-verbally, which is always super impressive, right? When you're telling the story and you're furthering your character development without talking, that's impressive. And that's something that's something that you always look for in something setting a movie on another level. Like one recent one I think that's comparable there is when you look at what Anna Taylor-Joy did in The Witch. We got a lot of character development there when she wasn't talking. And I think that type of thing can set a movie up to a higher level. Now, one level to another, not necessarily that big a deal, depending on where you started. But I do think that where this movie shines was the fact that a lot of this conversation, as odd as it was, felt natural. Like we were given to believe that that's just how Mike talks, because like the very first time we hear him say anything, he gives us a pretty solid rundown of the Satanic Panic, right? Which, by the way, to anyone in Hollywood who listens to Shiver, how is it that I don't have a 10-part documentary series on the Satanic Panic at this point? Like, this is something I want. So that's out there now. But like that's the very first time we hear him, and he gives us, and it's like, okay, so this guy's real like detail oriented, and that's just the way he talks. So then when he gives us the very detailed breakdown of how a lobotomy works, even though he was a law student, not a medical student, it's like, okay, well, I mean, so this guy studies a lot, right? Like that makes sense. And so we get these characters who, if nothing else, we get these actors had room to breathe and grow within these roles. And that added something to the movie, because you're right. That's what kept me coming back through some of those.
Did we lose Daniel?
And I think that's on me. Am I back?
Oh, yeah. Yep. Nice.
Oh, okay.
That was short.
Yeah, internet. I got a little thing popped up, so my internet got wonky. But like, those characters having, those actors having room to breathe within those roles is what kept me coming back in the scenes where the furthering of the plot was kind of dragging and some things like that. There was one really, really funny thing. Like I said, like some of this stuff just straight up cartoony. But like that when Hank is finding the trail of money, right? And it's like something out of a cartoon, like where they're piece of candy, right? Like, and they're like going to end up like I kept waiting for him to like find a box with a stick and like knock it out and get stuck, right? But like that scene in itself was so cartoonish, like that whole setup. But then there's just something about Josh Lucas's face, right? That like that worked. It's like, you know what? I'm looking at this guy right now, and I believe that he would follow a trail of silver coins. So I'm okay with this.
Hey man, you got to fund blackjack dealer school somehow. That's with you saying funny moments. That's one that stands out to me as well. Also, Josh Lucas is when Hank's, I think Mike's gone off to check the breakers or do something else, and he starts talking to Jeff. And they're just kind of hanging out. Hey, Jeff, do you know what a whale is? Like, yeah, I know what a whale is. A whale is a big spender at a casino. It goes into that whole story about how his friend got tipped at Porsche 911. And I like that. That's the way I get you're trying to get to the exposition of explaining a little bit more of who they are, why they're there, and kind of pinpointing, we've all got something that we can fall back on. Gordon does. So it kind of adds to the descent of his character. They just did it in a really funny way.
Yeah. It's
An
just
unnatural way. Like I would never say like, hey guys, have you ever heard or do you know what a rabbit is? Right. And then if you say, yeah, like I'm not going to say, oh, okay, cool. So a rabbit is, and then explain what a fucking rabbit is. That's not the way people converse.
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely some odd stuff there, but I think that the actors and the characters in this movie are what kept it alive.
Certainly. So that moves us into the last area before we get into the technical aspects of the movie, which is Simon, right? So we already talked about the fact that Simon is somewhat ambiguous, right? He's an ambiguous killer, ambiguous villain, what he is, right? Do you think that Simon works, right? Like, does he work in the same way that Pazuzu works in The Exorcist, or does he work the same way that the twin works in Malignant, right? How exactly does Simon work for you, and does Simon add anything to the movie? So we'll go with Hunger.
It's my opinion of Simon is kind of complicated. We've touched on a couple of the reasons already with the DID, the way that's presented, to where it's kind of okay, this lingers in this girl's mind. But then also, dissociative personalities don't jump from person to person. And something I've seen in relation to Session 9, I think it's referred to as a demon loci, or so it's something loci, something along those lines, which is the other opinion of what Simon is, it's this presence that, I live in the weak and wounded, could take anybody at any time. So it's like an interesting representation of a different aspect of mental health. Because that's kind of why these psychological ones always get me, is the idea that, we've got this 3-pound electrified sponge in our brains that's already telling us what to be scared of. But then, it could misfire. We've all been there, stress, not getting any sleep, stuff, you could snap at any point, which is
baby's got an ear infection that won't go away.
Yeah. God,
wife spilled some hot water on you.
I still don't know what the dog did to him, because I forgot that he killed the dog too.
Yeah,
I guess because it was just barking.
He was just overstimulated at that point.
Yeah,
it looked at him funny. The dog was a voyeur, and he was like, what's going on over here? He's like, fuck you.
Yeah, so it's kind of a mixed bag on it. I think it would work one way, it works better the other way, but then it just gets so convoluted with how he was, because he's this presence, but all the stuff Mary did was at her childhood home, which from what I gathered was a completely different city. So I guess unless he had somehow attached her, I don't know what happened in that house before that he would be there to pick up on her. So it's kind of one of those, this would make a lot of sense if you ever took the time to pick one and explain it.
Yeah. I think that because that's the one thing about the demon explanation. It's so did she bring it to the hospital with her, and then when she died through, I don't know, their weird aqua therapy or some of that weird stuff that they just kind of were like, this is creepy and asylum stuff, did she die during some of that and it was left there? Because I definitely think that the ending of that movie, we're supposed to buy into the fact that Simon is more than an altar. And I think that I think that the way that Hunger described it is far better than I could. But just that idea that even if I take it back. No, you still described it better. But those two ideas, right? Is it just that their brains snapped, and like you said, everybody's one bad day away, right? Or is it that it's a presence and just not committing to either one? For the purposes of this, I'm going to say that Simon was some sort of presence brought to the hospital by Mary and left there. And so that being said, if that's the case, I think that Simon's super effective, right? Because Gordon was only in that hospital for a quick visit and then went home and killed his wife and his kid, and then ended up killing his whole team in the course of 5 days. So Simon is effective in like the general, like, you know, like dollars and cents version of the word, right? Like he's effective, like he gets shit done on a good timetable. As far as being effective in being scary, when he was just an altar, that the idea of Simon was scarier. The thing that made Simon so scary, I think, was like that really weird audio quality of listening to the tapes. I mean, the Do It Gordon thing is horrifying. That's, you know, just like that creepy voice that he hears right away, you know, because that's the other thing. If we're looking at Simon as a presence, as soon as he sees that chair, he did start to hear something. And then that's the day he went home and killed his wife, right? So I think that that when you're looking at Simon as effective as being scary, I do think that this idea of Simon is very scary. I do think that either way you look at it, it can be scary, either as just being a misfiring of a human brain and therefore anybody's, you know, has the possibility for that. I think that the idea of him being some sort of presence that exists there and latches on to people is very scary. I just think that the fact that they, like, exactly like Hunger said, the fact that they didn't commit to either one takes away from his value.
When the movie was over, I kind of felt the same way that I did about was it called we have to do something?
Yes.
We need to do something about Kevin.
No. It's just called We Have to Do Something. It was like a Hulu one we did a little bit back.
Yeah. Because it had two really interesting ideas that kind of conflicted with one another. And I think that that's what's going on here, because a lot is made out about Mary Hobbs. The fact that he's in her room, and that's where he puts up her pictures, right? When his pictures rather, when for his own sort of therapy, I guess, right? He sits down at that tree right by her tombstone, right? Because it's number 444. The tree fell on the tombstone, right? So was it that Simon was inside of her still at that grave, and that kind of like shook loose Simon? He was like, oh shit, fucking earthquake, time to get out of here,
they moved the headstones and not the bodies.
We need to do that one.
Yeah.
I'm glad you said it, because I was thinking the exact same thing of like, I've just pictured in my mind the skeletons in the pool.
Yeah.
And then was it the tapes? Was it listening to the tapes that like brought him to life? Right? Is it kind of like a Freddy Krueger thing where like if no one believes in him, he goes away, right? So it was just he's too ambiguous for me to even consider him ever again, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know that I will ever think about Simon ever again. And I think that there was a lot of potential there, because the Simon, the altar that we see and build up to in those session tapes is fucking terrifying.
Right.
That murder that's committed. I mean, to me, it's got like Ronald DeFeo written all over it. Very famously, the murder that happened in the Amityville house. Right.
Right.
So I can't get into Simon, because he's either an altar that doesn't make sense, or he's a demonic spiritual possession that, again, like isn't explained. So to me, it's just, this is another one of those areas where the movie faltered. I think that Anderson was looking big picture and saying, oh yeah, but that ending is gonna fucking rock.
Yeah.
And then like I'm looking around like, but I clearly missed something, right?
Right.
Because like I don't get it. You know, it's kind of like when you're looking at the instruction booklet for Legos, right? And it's like, hey, here's this piece and here's that piece, and then you put them together, and this is what it looks like, and you're like, but I don't fucking get it, right?
Which is me anytime I put together Legos. So I'm always like,
Well, I
nope.
think they kind of tried to hint to a little bit to where maybe it wasn't just Gordon. I picked that up when I was watching it earlier. Whenever it's when Mike first sits down and is like, oh, hey, what's this? And he cuts the box open, and there's that scream as soon as he cuts the box open. It's kind of that leans a little bit to this is definitely a presence that has been let loose. You know, like I opened the Dybbuk box, and now we got
Right.
a Dybbuk we have to deal with.
Because then it like as he's doing it, it like cuts to everybody having some sort of minor inconvenience.
Yeah, I think one of them's like Josh Lucas. All of a sudden, his headset screeches and he takes it off. So I think they were kind of trying to. Like,
but let's be honest. We all had a Discman, all right. And we remember how often that shit would skip. All right.
Yeah,
right.
It's true. It's true. Skip
Yeah,
protection,
it was just that one of those like these are very minimal things, and like we've talked about where. Oh yeah, everybody's gonna pick this up. And it's like, well, I've seen this movie 5 times, and I don't think I noticed it until today. Is kind of like you're hinting at, oh, he's trying to get everybody, but Gordon's so fucking off the rails. He's the one that worked.
Right. So we talk about the filmmaking in the aspect of the characters and the development of Simon, but when we're looking at the actual filmmaking, the technical aspects of this movie, it's again like it doesn't look like anything that came out around the same time. So when you're looking at this movie, it feels pretty unique. But how did the filmmaking choices that Anderson went with in this like affect the overall finished product of the movie, Dave?
I think this is another area where it gave me Giallo vibes, because there's a very dreamlike quality to a lot of the movie. We mentioned that scene where I guess it's Simon, right, turns around in the hazmat suit and he's drenched in blood, right?
Yeah. Maybe
it's Gordon, maybe it's Simon. I'll just call it Sorden, whatever. I there's a really creepy vibe to that. And it's in the way that it's shot. I think the way that the chase before the kill happens is always shot really well too. But then the editing, I hate the way that it cuts away, like right before the fucking money shot. Like, right. No, let me see it. I want to see the money shot, and I don't need a ton of gore. I don't need like blood, splattering everywhere. But I felt like there was never a payoff for me, right? And even if the focus is the psychological aspect of this movie, again, I never felt like there was payoff there either. So it was just like one, incredible example of like blue balls, just never ever coming to fruition. The editing for me is what kind of is really jarring. There were times where it would fade in and out from one scene over into another, and it was done like it was like a really long fade, or the cuts would be really jarring, and I occasionally got lost in the asylum. Like I don't know if that was done purposefully, but what was his character's name? I don't want to keep calling him by his name. Griggs, Guilfoyle's character, does a really good job of explaining the asylum right away at the beginning of the movie, right? We talked about the fucking bat wings, right? So why is it that I occasionally get lost and I'm like, where the fuck are they?
Right.
and is that because the asylum has some sort of haunted presence, whatever, maybe, right? But I don't think that that's clear enough for me to say, okay, that was a specific decision, a filmmaking decision that was made to disorient us in the same way that the characters are disoriented, because I don't feel like they are. I feel like they always know where they are. It was me who didn't know. And it's not for lack of following the movie. Like, I did not pick up my phone the entire time because, like you, Daniel, I felt like I had to pay attention to this. And in the end, I didn't. But it was one of those things where I'm like, okay, the editing in this is really weird. And sometimes that was good, in those dreamlike sequences, the way it would flow into Gordon remembering a little bit more about the murder of his wife and daughter and dog, and then sometimes it wasn't, like I go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead. No, that's it.
I'm pretty much done.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Hunger, what about you, man?
I think that's the main thing that I like the most about Session 9 is that kind of creepy, unsteady quality to it, which, like you touched on, the disorienting factor of the hospital. Because in the end, whenever Jeff comes in, he's like, "Hey, I just saw Hank," and they're like, "No, Hank's in Miami. What are you talking about?" And they split up, and we're like, "All right, well, we're going to search the whole place until we find him." And they go one way, Gordon goes another way. Mike's just like, "I don't fucking care. I got to listen to this tape." But then whenever they do find Hank, and he's like, "Hey, where are you?" "Oh, I'm on Ward A, 3rd floor." And he's just very quickly gets to him. It didn't seem like, I thought you're in different parts of the hospital and this is all supposed to be a very big, spacious area, but they seem to get back to each other fairly quickly. So I can only hope that that was an intentional aspect of it, especially considering the choices as far as like, I feel like you touched on earlier with it seeming like a student film. It didn't seem like they used, it was mostly handheld camera because it got that kind of shaky.
Yeah.
The shaky cam kind of quality to it that was disorienting, the quick sweeping kind of shots of things. And then every once in a while, those long, like it's a wide shot, but it's focusing on something. And the two that stick out to me are when they're going down the tunnel that's got all the creepy, like hazmat gear hanging on the wall with the rubber gloves dangling. It's like there's a lot going on the sides and I'm waiting to see it, but we're being directed at the center. And then the other one is whenever Jeff's just, shitting himself from being scared of the dark, so he starts stuffing Oreos in his face. And you get that shot of him where we pretty much know who the killer is, but they're still kind of trying to disguise it where they show it from his view and he's running at him is the other one that just it's got a very unsettling vibe to it. And they actually, that's another IMDb trivia fact for you, one of the first feature films to use Sony's 24p HD. So it's an HD format that shoots at 24 frames per second. And apparently that helped them film natural light. So I think that kind of adds to the, you've got the creepy shadows, nothing's overly lit, but it's still got such a deep picture to it where, it's dark and creepy, but I can still see everything.
Right. Yeah. I'm actually with you on this one, Hunger. I think that the technical aspects of this film do so much to sell the creep, because I agree with what you were saying, Dave, and the fact that, the guy explains it very thoroughly. It seems like, okay, should be easy to get around this hospital. And yet I felt lost. I'd like to think that was on purpose, to draw to the Overlook. Right. Not so much in the fact that this hospital became a character like the Overlook did, but in the fact that you were always kind of led as to where you actually were in the Overlook, in the grand scheme of things. And I would like to think that that was done on purpose. And so times when it seemed like they should be close together, it took them a minute. Times when it seemed like they should be far away, they got to each other very quickly. Because again, like that, it's all. It just leads you. It's just that's something that makes it unsettling, and and it may be unsettling because you don't like it. It may be unsettling, and it just creeps you out. But I'm kind of with Hunger on this one. The way that they did some of that stuff was it made me uncomfortable. It's like that idea of when you're watching a live play that villains always enter from audience right, stage left, because then it's unnatural to look from right to left, right? So you automatically know, like, oh, this is a bad guy because that felt weird. Like that idea of, it's like, okay, something is wrong with this place because I'm never comfortable here, and I was okay with that. One thing that really stood out for me, and the filmmaking on this, we touched on it at the top, man, but some of the music and the scoring, the sound effects stuff, I went and looked it up. The music for this is by a band out of Seattle called Climax Golden Twins. Is who is credited as doing the music for this. According to their wiki, they're an experimental band out of Seattle. But I really, really liked the audio for this movie. I loved the way that the session tape sounded. I loved the even intensified creepiness of the Simon talking to Gordon directly. It was cheesy, but I loved the scream sound, like right before stuff would happen. I thought that was done well. But I am going to also agree with you, Dave, in the fact that, God, man, it's My Bloody Valentine all over again. It's like, we were almost there. And then you pulled the ripcord just a second too soon. And I wanted that. And absolutely, I don't need the buckets of blood, but I want the payoff. Like, I've been watching him run through this, this creepy hallway and get scared by pigeons. And I saw the real weird Signs-esque figure, in the background.
And he runs real well for a guy who's limping around all the time.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I wanted the payoff. Like, I mean, you can give me 1.5 seconds more that's just a hand showing me the pick. Because obviously, when we saw him in sunglasses, like the foreshadowing of, oh, all you got to do to hide it's wear sunglasses. Like, we knew when we saw Hank again in sunglasses that he was going to at least have a black eye.
Right.
Maybe not that the pick was still going to be there. Like, go ahead and show me the pick, man. It's not, you're not surprising anyone. By, we all know he was in the hospital and that something got him. Like, you don't need to keep pretending like we don't know. We know he's not in Miami. So they could have shown me the pick, right? And then it's still just as effective when you take the sunglasses off later and you see that it's still in there. So they could have given me that. Now, I will admit, one place where they cut that did leave just that much mystery was when Phil was standing there with the weird like hook knife thing that he was shredding stuff apart from.
Yeah.
And then it goes to the nephew getting killed, and it's like, oh shit, well now I don't know. Except for the fact that they spent way too much time focusing on a jar of Jif peanut butter. Like that Jif peanut butter, it's like, okay, so it's Gordon, right? Like, it's like, oh, there it is, and it is. Like,
it was right there, center frame, when he's bringing home his groceries.
Like, in both times, it was in a scene that was completely grayed out, except for this one bright red jar of Jif peanut butter. And it's like, for all the times you tried to fool us, did you not? Like, that was ham-fisted. But they did do a lot of things that even though you're pretty sure, they keep you guessing right up until that last moment, when he's standing there talking to Phil and Phil's not really there. They did some good stuff with that. But the shaky cam stuff, that shot, man, of down the hallway where I guess that's where they store their hazmat suits or whatever. I honest to God don't care why they were all there, or even if they were really there or that was in his imagination.
Bugged me. That bugged me.
that shot was so scary. Like that was so thoroughly creepy that I was like, I had a moment where I was like, the hell is all this? And I was like, oh, this is crazy. Like, so again, like that was one where I was naive enough to be like, I'm just going to enjoy that. This is a really creepy shot. And you know, they were just hoping I would do that a lot more throughout the movie.
To me, it was very reminiscent again of We Need to Do Something, because there were two really great shots in that movie. They were so good. And then in discussing it, we realized they mean nothing.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what that was there. It's like we've seen this hallway before. Never have we seen it lined with all these hazmat suits. And also, why would the hazmat suits be in the exact center of the fucking asylum? Like they would be up at the top, like where you gotta get changed,
where the clean room is.
Right.
Well, and that's another IMDb trivia fact for you. They should just fucking hire me at this point, I guess. But that, because of course Danvers State Hospital, actual place, apparently actually really creepy, because David Caruso said he saw stuff going by windows, and Peter Mullins said that at one point they were filming on the roof and he heard a voice in his head tell him to jump off just to see what would happen. So already creepy place.
Fuck that. Like seeing stuff outside the window is fine. A voice telling me to jump on the stand on the roof, fuck that. Find somebody else. I don't.
But so it's an already creepy place, and they really didn't have to touch up much because there was all the stuff that was already there. They just kind of moved it around to make it more prominent. But they added 3 aspects to it. They added a hydrotherapy tub. They added the meat hooks that are hanging in that kitchen whenever he goes in reason. At the end.
Yep.
And the suits, the rubber suits weren't in the actual hospital. They added those. So it's like the ones that are the most illogical are also the ones that they did on purpose.
That's pretty great.
The other shot that I was like, man, it's a great fucking shot. Like it's iconic. Like it's on the fucking poster of the movie.
Yeah.
But ended up in my mind being meaningless. And maybe you guys can put some perspective to this, is the shot of the wheelchair down the hall. They never explain the meaning behind the wheelchair, why Gordon heard the voice looking at the wheelchair, like was Mary Hobbs in that chair? Like what the fuck was the point of it? And they go back to it multiple times, and I just end up thinking like this is one of those like big picture things that Anderson was talking about. He's like, yeah man,
again,
that fucking wheelchair, we're gonna keep going to it, and people are gonna be like, yo, I'm afraid of wheelchairs now. And I don't know. That's the kind of thing that in like it doesn't register in my lizard brain, you know, like in the very center of my brain, you know, there's an accountant, and he wears really thick glasses, and he's got that green visor that they wear, and he wears a necktie that's just a little too tight, like Mr.
And
Mackey.
that one band up on his forearm, on his bicep, we don't know what it does.
And he's like constantly calculating. He's constantly calculating, and you know, ding and ding. And at the end of the scene, he looks up at me and says, "That one didn't fucking work. Doesn't add up." And that's what that was for me. The same as the shot down the hallway with the hazmat suits. It doesn't account to anything.
Like we said it, like I said at the top, man, like we just keep saying, like big picture, right? That was like, I can see that being a storyboard image that somebody drew and was like, yo,
because it's a great shot.
Yeah, like what if we just have this one long shot that a creepy hallway, light from one door coming in, hits this wheelchair, right? Like that fucks.
And you know, and you can't walk across to get to it.
Yeah.
Water damage.
And then they were just like, yeah. It's like, why is it there? I don't fucking care. It's gonna look cool. Like, you know, and you just gotta kind of be like, you know what? It did look cool.
That's what I think is that Anderson must, when they were, because apparently he decided to make a movie about Danvers because he drove by it every day. And I can only imagine he went in and the chair must have been in that spot, and he must have gone in when the light was hitting it. He's like, oh, that's fucking creepy.
did this
like
thing?
Yeah. It's like, this is creepy. This is so cool. But then kind of didn't it's like we don't. People are just going to think it's cool. That's all that
Yeah.
matters. And because my only way that I can piece together its meaning is, like you said, David, maybe that was Mary Hobbs' chair because it's outside a room.
Right.
Maybe it's just supposed to be one of those like
Or
mental
we
associations.
assume it's outside her room because we never actually connect with that hallway.
Yeah,
but
that's
but we
maybe
see
like a
the
landmark.
police tape get ripped, like when David Caruso's going in there, and we kind of saw that around the same spot, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's just one of those mental associations of like, this is a landmark for this creepy lady's room.
Okay.
And so when you see a chair, you're just supposed to automatically associate it with, oh, shit's about to go down.
Yeah, but
that makes sense.
But to Dave's argument about just like making people afraid of wheelchairs, wasn't the only one that we got multiple shots of. There was one that was like turned over on its side that we saw a couple times too. Like
That's
they kept
true.
kind of like
Oh, yeah.
almost tripping over it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do think that one is just like I said. I think that Hunger might have got it. I think it might have been in like an area where he saw the light hitting it. I'm telling you, I could just see him giving it one of these, and it's like, yeah,
That's the shot.
Oh, that's the shot.
Yeah. Can we roll tape? We're losing light here. Losing light. So that pretty much just leaves us with rating this movie, right? Now, as we've done with every other guest pick for the summer, we're giving you the opportunity, Hunger, to decide what the metric will be for our rating. So we always rate a movie on its own, right? On its own merit. So we don't give stars, right? Everyone has its own thing. So do you have a rating system for the movie?
I do, and it's appropriate considering the conversation that we just had.
Okay.
Spooky chairs.
All right. Yeah,
go.
that works. Yeah. So Hunger out of
hold on, just real quick.
Yeah.
Before we actually rate it, Hunger, when I was explaining this to you, you said you had a couple of possibilities. So I just want to know, we're going to go with spooky chairs, but you had said that there was like one for people who were really familiar with. Didn't you have some other ideas?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what they are now, because when I was like, I kept coming back like, oh, now spooky chair.
Okay. All right. Just wondered.
But I know one of them. Oh, it was one of them was Oreos, and one of them was, "Hey, fuck yous."
All right.
I
think the spooky chairs is the right call, but that was
fun. All right. So Hunger, out of a possible 5 spooky chairs, how many spooky chairs do you give this?
I'm kind of torn between 3 and 3.5, so I'm going to err on 3 1/4. Meet it in the middle.
We're gonna make you pick though. We don't do quarters.
Oh, damn! I will. Making me decisive.
Yes.
I'm gonna go with 3.
Okay.
It's got a lot of merit as far as filmmaking and the technical aspects of it, but then there are a lot of little nitpicky, like I said, Paul Guilfoyle's accent, just the little things that take you out, and the excessive exposition and those kind of it's a very well made movie, but not a very well written movie.
Okay.
Fair.
Daniel?
I'm gonna sit right there at 3 too. I think that there are some merits here. I think this is worth recommending to somebody who's just kind of looking for something new. I think that there's just enough pieces here to sell a decent story. I think that there's a couple of scares. I think that there's a really high creepy factor, which is something that isn't always manufactured well, and that's something that they definitely put together very well in this movie. I think that it's one that I do think that, like I said, there's some recommendation value in this. I've seen it twice now. I'm probably good, as far as rewatchability. But I don't know, if it were October and somebody was like, oh, Daniel, show us like something corny, that we can just, like that whole thing, right? You go back to that and it's like, all right, I got one that rides that line and we can have some fun with it. So yeah, I'm going to sit solidly at 3.
So I really didn't like this movie. And it's kind of weird because I've said that there's parts of this movie that definitely have merit, but this is the first time on the show that I've watched a movie where I thought I should have done something else. Like I would have rather watched I don't know, like fucking Halloween for like the 57th time, or something like that. And I'm glad I watched it because now I know not to watch it again.
Fair. Okay.
Yeah, and I never like to shit on a guest's pick, but I definitely didn't like this one, and this is actually going to get the lowest score that I've given so far. It's going to be a 1 spooky chair.
Oof.
Yeah,
Oof.
I don't see myself ever watching this again. I don't see myself recommending this to anyone. This might be on my list of like the worst movies I've ever seen.
Ouch! Good.
Yeah, I can't.
Gloves are off.
I can't explain why it doesn't work for me. In that way, right? Because like I can't explain why something like Texas Chainsaw Massacre works so well for me.
Yeah,
because that's a movie that's so much better than the sum of its parts. And if I were to just talk about what makes up Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it still wouldn't equal how much I like it, So I guess it's just one of those things where it really didn't work for me, and I mean, I don't want to say I'd rather have like clip my toenails or something during that time, but maybe.
All right. Well, Dave's one spooky chair aside. The official, when we go all three of us, it's going to average out at 2 and 3 repeating. So we're going to round that up to 2.5. Yeah. So 2.5 spooky chairs is the official Shiver review for that one. Hunger, thank you for recommending this one, man. Thank you for coming on. Do you have anything you want to let people know about?
Well, I mean, if you're in Tuscaloosa, you ever want to come by trivia night, consider following me at Tallboy Trivia. That's on Instagram and Facebook. Every Monday night at the Gray Lady on Greensboro in downtown Tuscaloosa. Stop by. We have a lot of fun. More than happy to have you. And also, thank you guys again for having me on. This was a lot of fun. I've only ever done one, the Daniel, that baseball.
Oh, yeah. Baseball movies. Yeah.
Mount Geekmore. That was a lot of fun. Had a lot of fun talking to you guys tonight. So I really appreciate you having me.
Yeah,
this was a lot of fun. Yeah, I didn't like the movie, but I did enjoy this.
Yeah,
so.
Hunger does run a great trivia Monday nights at the Gray Lady here in Tuscaloosa. So if you're listening, and you haven't made it out to see him. He's got a great setup. And look, you're going to be hard pressed to find somebody more knowledgeable about stuff that doesn't matter. And that's not putting Hunger down in any way. It's just like the.
It's okay. I say that about myself.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Like just your depth of knowledge on like so many things is insane. And
that's
so
what people will be like, oh man, you're so smart. And the thing I always say is like, I'm not smart. I know a lot of dumb shit. There's a difference.
So make sure you head by and check that out. If you're listening for the first time to us, or maybe you just got onto the show, make sure you check us out. You can find us on all of our social media at Shiver Pod. Our Instagram is probably our most popular one. The music threw me off there for a second. Make sure you head over to Spotify. Drop us that 5 stars. Leave us a review. Let us know what you think. School's back in. Summer's over. I think we're done with vacation, so we should be pretty regular again.
Yeah, absolutely. So please make sure to check out all our other Geek Bro Network podcasts. You can find them at geekbro.net. You can find all of our social media where, Daniel?
At Shiver Pod.
there you go, at ShiverPod. We're on the Twitter, we're on the Instagram, on the Facebook, on the YouTube, everywhere. Wherever you can, pick up the social medias, we're there. Not on TikTok though. Maybe we should start doing some TikToks, but that takes time.
Yeah, look, I use TikTok. I'm too old to make them, man. Like, I'm not gonna claim like, oh, I'm too old to use it. I use TikTok a lot. I don't know that I got it in me to make TikToks.
Yeah. I don't know about that. I just like looking at dogs and kids do stupid shit.
Right.
So on behalf of all of us here on Shiver, write you very much.